Go west, young man, go west. Never in all of American history has a more romantic picture been painted. From the snow-covered Rockies to the windswept plains and sunsets made to ride off into. Yes, the West. The Wild West. The land of drifters and dreamers, men and women, boys and girls, all filled with visions of fame and fortune. For most, visions is all they ever were, but there were those that made sure their name was never forgotten, and though their lives may have ended long ago, what they did throughout them still lives on in the pages and poetic words of dime store novels, and on the magic glow of the silver screen. Is it all true? Who knows? But let's not let the fine line between fact and fiction ruin a good story. Welcome to the first episode of the Horseshoes and Hand Grenades podcast. It's Wednesday, so that means it's time for things to get a little Western. I feel like everyone has an image that comes to their mind when they think of the Wild West. Or even the Old West. They're technically different time periods, but doesn't really matter. It's this image of a frontier town with a saloon smack dab in the center of it. And there's one dusty main street that just looks like it was made for showdowns at high noon. I know that certainly comes to my mind. But before that iconic image came to life, there was nothing but rugged wilderness. And that wilderness had to be explored. Explored by a certain caliber of man. One who possessed an uncommon amount of grit. True grit. Think Rooster Cogburn level grit. For those of you who don't understand that reference, just do yourself a favor and watch the movie True Grit. Just make sure it's the original with John Wayne and Glenn Campbell. But getting back to men with uncommon grit, and a certain restless spirit that led to their eyes being forever drawn toward distant mountains. And if that didn't give away who I'm talking about, I'll just flat out spoil it for you. I'm talking about mountain men. Giving respect where it's due, they were largely responsible for westward expansion, as they blazed the trails that settlers would come to use in their journey towards a new life. They were also responsible for some of the most incredible stories of the time, or incredibly outrageous depending on what you choose to believe. And today I want to tell the story of a man named Jedediah Smith. Jedediah Smith was more than once described as the perfect model of a mountain man. Long and lean, though probably not every young man's dream. Go ahead and leave a comment if you know what song that's from. He was born in Bainbridge, New York in 1799, and from there grew up in different parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio. It was while working as a teenager, he allegedly read the expedition journals of none other than Lewis and Clark. Allegedly, because no one really knows the reading habits of teenage Jedediah Smith, and as someone who has read, or at least skimmed over, parts of the Lewis and Clark journals, I can say they're not exactly a thrilling read. As a matter of fact, they're kinda boring, truth be told. So, I will remain a skeptic as to whether or not he actually read the journals, but moving on. Something lit a fire deep in his soul. A burning desire to live the life of a trailblazer, an adventurer, a wanderer. By 1822, he had reached St. Louis, and it was there that he answered to an ad in the Missouri Gazette, which was seeking, and I quote, enterprising young men to locate fur trapping grounds along the Missouri River. Of course, enterprising young men were a little different back then. Nowadays, your common self-proclaimed entrepreneur is a frat boy who, after throwing back a few beers, starts swearing that on God he's gonna be a millionaire someday. But I digress. Answering the ad, he became part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, beginning a life of almost endless exploration of the Northwest wilderness. Fast forward to the following fall of 1823, where Smith was with a trapping party searching for new beaver grounds south of the Yellowstone River. While exploring, he came across a rather large, rather irritated grizzly bear, which proceeded to use him as a chew toy. It's unclear why or how the bear didn't kill him right then and there. Some say he survived by playing dead, while others go as far as to say that he actually killed the grizzly bear. Whatever it may have been, he was alive when members of his party found him, mauled so badly that the bear had literally torn his scalp and ear from his head. And it was only upon Smith's insistence that party member Jim Kleiman sewed his scalp back on. And somehow, after being mauled by a grizzly, and at a time when infection was pretty much a death sentence, with nothing more than frontier medicine, he survived. It wasn't until a few years later, in 1826, that Smith undertook what most consider to be his greatest venture, where he led a party of trappers on an overland journey from Utah to the Colorado River, then across the Mojave Desert and into Southern California, which, at the time, mind you, was still under the control of the Spaniards, who naturally politely insisted that he get the hell out. But just to make things interesting, he and his party wintered in the San Joaquin Valley and trapped along the Stanislaus River, before beginning the return journey that spring, leading the first Anglo-American party to cross the Sierra Nevada and the Great Salt Lake Desert. The journey, as described by Smith himself, was arduous, which is no small thing coming from a man who essentially lived his life outdoors under all conditions, traveling everywhere either on foot or on horse. It was so bad, according to Smith's accounts, that they would travel for days without water, and by the time they arrived at Salt Lake, they had only one horse and one mule left alive. And, quote, "The balance of my horses I was compelled to eat as they gave out," which, especially for a mountain man, is a somewhat eloquent and gentle way of saying he ate the horses when they died. Barely a year later, he set out with another party of 18 men to retrace his trail back to California, and then from there to explore the Oregon coast. Never one for a dull journey, Smith and his party managed to find plenty of trouble along the way. First, when half of the group was massacred in a surprise attack at a Mojave Indian village. Then, after arriving in California, he spent a little bit of time in jail at the San Jose Mission, which after being released, he continued northward to the Klamath River, in Oregon, where his party was once again attacked by less than friendly natives who killed all but Smith and 3 of his men. At long last, Smith and his surviving men reached Fort Vancouver in July of 1928. It was a fairly short 2 years later that Smith sold his beaver trapping enterprise to the Rocky Mountain Fur Company before traveling to St. Louis and at the time being moderately wealthy, with every intention of settling down, because Smith, oddly enough for a man of his nature, was a devout Christian, and in his own words, missed the care of the Christian church. However, it didn't take long for Smith to grow restless yet again, and in 1831 he put together a trading caravan of over 70 men, including old friend Tom Fitzpatrick, who incidentally was a member of the party that was with Smith when he had his encounter with the rather irritated grizzly. The caravan left from St. Louis with a final destination in mind of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Partway into the journey, the party was running dangerously low on water, so Smith and Fitzpatrick took it upon themselves to ride ahead and try and find a stream bed. After splitting up, Smith did find a small water pocket. Unfortunately for him, he also found a Comanche war party. He put up a valiant fight, managing to get off one shot with his Hawken rifle, which, legend goes, killed the leader of the Comanche band before he himself was killed. His body was never found nor recovered. Though his life ended at the relatively young age of 32, his achievements would rival those of a man who had lived 2 lifetimes. He was the first Anglo-American to not only discover, but also travel the length and width of the Great Basin. He, for all intents and purposes, pioneered the overland trail to California. He was the first Anglo-American to cross the Sierra Nevada and the Great Salt Lake Desert, and he was the first to travel overland from California to the Columbia River in Oregon. Many of those trails would later be followed by pioneers and settlers bound for California, which made Jedediah Smith one of the West's first and one of its greatest pathfinders. To this day, his legacy lives on, whether in stories like the one you're hearing now, in books, and even in movies. The most noteworthy, in my mind, being the 2006 comedy Night at the Museum. And though it doesn't exactly hold up when it comes to a historical accuracy standpoint, I do have a soft spot in my heart for that miniature cowboy portrayed by Owen Wilson that goes by the name Jedediah Smith. And with that, I conclude today's episode on the life and legacy of legendary mountain man Jedediah Smith. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, I encourage you guys to subscribe or follow along, as I'll be posting new episodes, hopefully every Wednesday, covering more legends of the Wild West. Also, on a side note, if you enjoy content about military history, be sure and tune in for Freedom Friday, where we will cover the heroic deeds of America's finest sons and daughters. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. If you'd like to go the extra mile in showing your support for the podcast, I'll leave a link to my Patreon down in the description, or you can just find it on Patreon by typing in Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. And with that, I bid you all adios until next time. Thanks.